Hello, and welcome to week 7 of e-learning. To finish out these last 2 weeks of school, we are going to try to focus on three-dimensional shapes. So we're going to talk about surface areas and volumes for some different types of three-dimensional solids. Last week, one of your assignments was to identify the different types of three-dimensional solids like cylinders and prisms and cones and things like that. This week, we're going to focus on 3 of those shapes. We're going to talk about cylinders, cones, and spheres. So this first lesson is going to be over cylinders. So if you think back to last week on those three-dimensional solids, a cylinder looks something like what you see on the screen right here. So it's a three-dimensional solid. It has circles for bases. So here you have a circle at the top and a circle at the bottom. Those serve as what we call the bases of the solid. Now, cylinders can be upright, like you see here, or you can even see them sometimes where they're laying on their side. So something more like this. Okay, so it doesn't matter how they're oriented. Basically, what you're looking at is, does it have circles at each end? So circle on top and bottom, or circle on left and right. And if that's the case, then you know you're working with a cylinder in that particular instance. Now, what we're going to focus on, like we said, with these three-dimensional solids is really just kind of 2 main concepts: how to find surface area, how to find volume. So for a cylinder, when we want to calculate surface area, we have a formula, which you can see here. Okay, so we got this T. So T stands for total surface area. And basically what we're finding is what's the area of the entire outside of the shape. So what's the area of the 2 circles here, and what's the area of this blue kind of rectangle that wraps around it. So that's what we're looking for when we apply this formula here. So a couple of things about this formula. In this formula, we have this 2 pi r. So to start off the whole thing, this 2 pi r right off the bat here is the circumference of the base. So this is something we talked about not too long ago. Finding circumference of a circle, this is where it comes into play a little bit. Now the h that you see there, so h right here stands for the height of the cylinder. Now height is not always up and down. So in the height, what we're talking about is from one base to another. So I start at one circle and travel across the figure to the other circle. This would be the height of my cylinder. If my cylinder was laying down, like we saw on that last slide there, so if I had a cylinder that looks like this, okay, now the height is no longer up and down. When I talk about height, it's got to go from one circle all the way to the other. So now the height goes from left to right. So it's really important to note that when we talk about height, that h, it's from one circle all the way to the other. As far as the rest of the formula then, you've got over on the right side here, this pi r squared. And if you remember from a couple weeks ago or last week, pi r squared is the area of the circle. And since we have 2 circles, one on top here and one on bottom here, we need 2 areas, which is where that 2 comes from there. So when we're finding surface area of a cylinder, what you basically need to know is the formula, which we have right here, and then you just plug things in. So for this particular cylinder, if I start plugging things into my formula, I'm going to have 2 times pi times the radius. So radius is of the circle, that's that 11 meters there in the red. And then the height from one circle to the other in this case would be 10. And then plus 2 times pi, radius again, so 11 squared. So let's just take the information from the picture, plug it directly into the formula. Now when you go to solve this, we're going to use, for simplicity's sake, instead of plugging in pi as the actual number, we're just going to use the 3.14. So anytime in these formulas where you see a pi included, you're just going to type 3.14 into your calculator. So once we get to this point, we just type it all in. So 2 times 3.14 times 11 times 10, and then plus 2 times 3.14 times 11 squared. So you just type it in exactly like you see it there in the formula. And then when you hit enter, in this particular case, we get a surface area of 1450.7. So we're just going to go to one decimal place for these. And then meters squared, because we're finding an area. So our total surface area would look like that. Okay. So if we take a look at another example here, so given another cylinder, finding surface area. So the thing here is we start with our formula. So always write the formula for the problem. 2 pi RH plus 2 pi r squared. And then we go ahead and just plug everything in. So I've got 2 times pi times my 2.5 for the radius. Height, again, from one circle to the other, which in this case would be 8. And then we finish it off with 2 times pi times radius again, squared. And then again, you go ahead and plug it into your calculator. So 2 times 3.14 times 2.5 times 8 plus 2 times 3.14 times 2.5 squared. And then when you do that, you get a surface area in this case of 164.9 feet squared. Okay. And that's surface area. So when you see a shape that comes out as a cylinder, you have the formula. So you just write the formula out and then just plug things in as you go. So radius, height, radius again. And then it's just plug in your calculator, find your answer. For volume, then, when we want to find the volume of a cylinder, we use a little bit different formula here. So for volume, we have this pi times r squared times h. And so what we're looking at here is, again, the pi r squared, that's the area of one of our circles. H is height of the cylinder. And again, it's important to note that that height is from one circle to the other. So from one circle across the shape to the other gives me height. It's not up and down in this case. Okay, so just be aware of that when you're looking at these problems here. Now this one, we kind of already have worked out for you. So we have pi r squared. In this case, r, the radius is 4. 12 is the height from circle to circle. And so if we plug that in, we get 192 pi. Now the 603.2 would be if we use the actual value of pi. If we type in 3.14 like we're going to do, we actually end up with a little bit different volume. So we get, in this case, 602.9. And then notice the change in units. Now it's centimeters cubed because we're looking at volume, which is a cubed value. So 602.9 centimeters cubed. Okay. Just like surface area, the main thing here is we just plug straight into the formula. So once we know what the formula is, we write it down, plug in radius, plug in height, plug it in the calculator, get your answer. So then one more quick example here. Volume is pi times radius squared times height. We look at the picture, the radius in this case is 3, so we have pi times 3 squared, and the height from circle to circle is 4.5. Okay, and then from here we plug into our calculator. So again, you just plug it in as you see it. So 3.14 times 3 squared times 4.5. And so when we do that, this cylinder has a volume of 127.2 feet cubed. Okay, so for cylinders, know the two formulas. Surface area is 2 pi RH plus 2 pi r squared. Volume, pi r squared h. Remember that h doesn't have to go up and down. It goes from one circle to the other circle. So pay really close attention to that in the cylinder that you're looking at. And then plug everything in your calculator, round your answers to one decimal place, and then put the appropriate units if it applies to the problem. And that's surface area and volume of a cylinder. If you have any questions on any of that, make sure you show up to your teacher's Zooms over the course of the week. Ask any questions you need to. They can kind of go through things a little bit more in detail if need be, but that should cover pretty much everything you need for cylinders.